Elephant populations are being illegally killed for their ivory. Thus, governments will often seize illegal shipments of ivory and send them to scientists who use gel electrophoresis to find the DNA of the different elephants hidden in the ivory. Since elephants from the same area tend to have similar DNA fingerprints, scientists are able to match the results of these metaphorical footprints with similar ones from wild populations. This helps them build a map to determine where the hotspots of poaching are, which helps local law enforcement apprehend the people responsible. Now, speaking of DNA, we need to discuss the chemistry of life. There are four macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates are simple sugars. They are the main source of energy for all cells. While they do not contain a lot of energy, it can deliver that energy very quickly. Lipids are complex sugars. They contain more energy, but are much harder to get it from, and therefore are only used in times of emergency. They're also important in the phospholipid bilayer, where it creates a semi-permeable membrane that keeps dangerous particles out while still allowing nutrients and water through. Proteins are chains of amino acids. They build enzymes, muscles, and even transport oxygen throughout the body. Finally, there are nucleic acids, which build DNA and RNA, as well as contain the genetic material for every single organism in the world. They are formed from a pentose sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogenous base, being one of these four: guanine, thymine, adenosine, and cytosine. The DNA in elephant tusks can be used to track populations because similar genetic makeup indicates being part of the same population, as seen in this gel electrophoresis model to the right, where the two similar groups of DNA come from the same populations of elephants. Now let's talk about the cell structure and functions. There are two main types of cells: prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotes are small and simple. They don't have a nucleus or many organelles, and they are always found in unicellular organisms. Eukaryotes are larger and more complex. They have many membrane-bound organelles and a defined nucleus, and can be both in single-celled or multicellular organisms. Each organelle serves a different purpose, like lysosomes removing dangerous substances, or Golgi bodies modifying and packaging proteins for exportation out of the cell. Each type of cell does something different as well, like blood cells transporting oxygen throughout the body, liver cells moderating glucose levels, or stomach cells secreting enzymes and acids while also not being digested by them themselves. Elephants have a special type of cell called an odontoblast that builds their tusks. Now, in order to build the tusks, the odontoblasts have to get that energy from somewhere. This is where cellular energetics comes into play. Cells get their energy through one of two ways: cellular respiration or photosynthesis. In cellular respiration, the cell converts oxygen and sugars into water and CO2, in the process using mitochondria to capture the energy given off to make ATP. Photosynthesis, which occurs in plant cells, takes CO2 and water and converts them into oxygen and sugars using ATP, as well as sunlight and chloroplasts. This energy is then stored in phosphate groups. Now, what is ATP? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It stores potential energy in the bonds through its phosphate groups. Important here is endosymbiotic theory, which states that ancient eukaryotes ate ancient prokaryotes, and instead of digesting them and converting them into nutrients, they formed a symbiotic relationship in which those ancient chloroplasts and mitochondria would provide the cell with energy and nutrients, and the same in reverse. Something very interesting about the cellular energy of elephants is how little ATP they actually burn. The reason for this is because it turns out that larger body masses actually retain heat better than the smaller ones, meaning that in proportion to other animals, a mouse would burn exponentially more ATP than an elephant. And this is because since it's a smaller body, it will lose heat much more quickly. And elephants are also very important to the carbon cycle, because them being so massive, despite the small ATP requirement, they still need to consume quite a bit. So they digest the plants, break down the sugars, And part of the thing that is released when the sugars are broken down is carbon in the form of carbon dioxide. And when the CO2 gas leaves the elephant, it's then absorbed by plants, where the cycle starts all over again.
The cell cycle consists of growth phases, DNA replication during S phase, and finally, cellular division through mitosis. The goal of mitosis is to create an identical, perfect copy of a cell. Perfect mitosis ensures perfect DNA replication, which is vital for a massive organism like an elephant to grow, develop, and heal damaged tissues. However, when replication errors occur during the S phase, they can cause genetic mutations. These mutations can be harmful, neutral, or sometimes beneficial, depending on the environmental pressures. In the Mozambique elephant population, the tuskless trait is the result of a genetic mutation. Because of cell cycle dynamics, this specific mutation has been replicated and passed down through millions of cellular divisions during development. It shows that the highly regulated cell cycle is the engine that preserves and duplicates the genetic mutations driving the physical shifts we observe on the savanna. At the molecular biology level, genetic information moves from DNA to RNA to protein. Transcription occurs in the nucleus, where DNA is transcribed into messenger RNA. That mRNA travels to the ribosome in the cytoplasm, where translation occurs. Transfer RNA brings specific amino acids to build a growing protein chain based on the codon sequence. This process is exactly how an elephant grows tusks. The DNA codes for specific proteins that construct the ivory. But in the Mozambique elephants, the mutated DNA sequence changes the mRNA code, which alters the final protein synthesis. The instruction to build ivory is simply missing or turned off. Our biotechnology lab focused directly on this DNA structure. We use gel electrophoresis to analyze variations in DNA, allowing us to see how structural differences in the genetic sequences can identify different organisms' populations. By using the electrophoresis gel, we can compare genetic markers from poached ivory to known wild populations. This molecular tool helps us physically visualize the DNA structure, allowing us to trace poaching hotspots. Through meiosis and heredity, biology shifts from making identical cells to making unique ones. Meiosis is the process of creating gametes, sperm and egg cells, for sexual reproduction. Through crossing over and independent assortment, meiosis ensures that genes are mixed randomly, creating genetic diversity in the next generation. It is this exact process of heredity that caused the tuskless trait to spread so rapidly in Mozambique. The gene for tusklessness is actually a sex-linked dominant trait. Interestingly, it is lethal to male offspring. Because of how this trait is inherited on the X chromosome during meiosis, we see a huge population of female elephants without tusks in Gorongosa, while the males generally still have them or do not survive development. Meiosis acts as the sorting mechanism that dictates how this unique, survival-driven genetic trait is handed down from one generation of elephants to the next. Natural selection is the core concept that species evolve to better fit their environment. Normally, natural selection takes thousands of years, but in the case of the African elephant in Mozambique, humans forced it to happen in just a few decades. During the Civil War, Poachers killed many elephants specifically for their ivory to fund the conflict. This created an extreme selective pressure. Having tusks went from being a huge survival advantage to being a fatal flaw. Elephants with tusks were killed before they could reproduce, meaning their genes were removed from the gene pool. The rare tuskless elephants survived, reproduced, and passed that trait on. This created a massive, measurable decrease in tusk frequency in the gene pool, and a massive, measurable increase in tuskless elephants. It's a perfect, though tragic, example of rapid human-induced evolution in action, showing how a population can adapt physically to escape extreme predation.
I think that's it, right?
Ecology focuses on the biosphere and how organisms interact with their environment. Elephants are what we call a keystone species. This means that their presence is critical to the survival of the entire ecosystem. Other animals, like zebras, rely heavily on elephants. Elephants use their tusks to dig deep into dry riverbeds to create water holes, and they knock down trees to maintain the open savanna grasslands. If we remove elephants, or if they lose their tusks and can no longer dig for water or strip trees, it negatively impacts all other species in their habitat. In Mozambique, we are seeing these ecological dynamics play out in real time. The landscape of Gorongosa is changing because the elephants can no longer engineer it the way they used to. Without their tusks to pull down woody vegetation and clear paths, grasslands are shifting, demonstrating how a genetic change in a single species can alter the ecology of an entire landscape.
My Laudato Si quote is, "The urgent challenge to protect our common home includes the concern to bring the whole human family together to seek a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change." And that is Laudato Si 13. According to Genesis 2:15, God told us to care for his creation, not destroy it, but humans are destroying his creation anyway. Poaching elephants is horrible because they're a keystone species, so harming the elephants also harms the ecosystem they live in. This quote is very meaningful to me because if we are to repair the damage, the global community will need to work together as one, and I feel that this quote embodies that very well.
Another essential concept from Laudato Si reminds us of our core duties in section 217. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. This quote clearly shows that we have a responsibility. Protecting this world and all the life in it is not just a suggestion, it is essential to living a good, virtuous life. The elephants in Mozambique are a prime example of God's handiwork. Massive, intelligent, and vital to their environment, when humans' greed threatens them, we are called to be their protectors. The study of biology is one of the greatest tools we have for this vocation. Understanding how cells work, how DNA is replicated, and how ecosystems can balance themselves isn't just academic knowledge. As we saw in our gel electrophoresis lab, it is practical knowledge that can be used to stop illegal wildlife trade. When we use our understanding of genetics to map populations and stop poaching, we are actively living out our vocation as protectors of God's creation.